Well, it's not quite springtime yet, but it's a beautiful day out and the snow's melted, the ground's dry. So it's a perfect time to get out and pick up the walnuts that I need to make this pen. During the fall and early winter, I stack all my walnuts from all my trees at the base here, and then throughout the winter, the squirrels come and they eat all of the nuts and they leave the shells for me, so it kind of makes my job easy. I don't have to break all these open. All I have to do is collect them early enough in the season. They haven't been rained on a lot, so they're not dirty and muddy, and it'll be easier getting them cleaned and prepared for our casting. All right, well, we just finished picking up all them walnuts out of the yard. Thankfully, it was a clean, dry day. We got them before the lawnmower season started, and we disintegrated them. So now I've got a box of walnuts. We have to prepare them for the resin. So here's what we're gonna need. I'm gonna use a piece of stainless steel plate and a hammer. All right, so I'm gonna put safety glasses on. I'm gonna put my piece of steel plate down, and you can use whatever you have, but you need preferably something hardened metal. I don't want to damage my table saw top because I don't want it to obstruct when I'm sliding something across it to cut it. So I use this piece of steel plate that I picked up at a scrap. But we want to lay this down, and I'm going to put something over it and take my hammer and smack it. And it's going to allow me to break these without pieces flying all over the place. So it helps you control the mess if you can put something over the top, a rag. Sometimes you might have to hit it a couple times. But the main thing is we want to break it so that it looks like a squirrel chewed it apart. And that's what these edges are. They're all just random breaks. They're not, nothing is straight, nothing looks like a cut edge. It's all just almost like a squirrel would have chewed that himself. And what that's going to do on our blank is just give us more of a man-made look to it. It's going to keep everything random. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time breaking up the rest of these nuts, and when I get enough to fill the mold, we'll move on to the next process. All right, now we're done with the messy part, and it is messy. The only alternative to that would be find somebody in your friend group or neighborhood that likes to cast resin and buy them from them. That's what my friends do. So we'll get this out of the way. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take some denatured alcohol, and you'll see this is written on here for walnut blanks. What I do is I reuse this, so it's a little dark from previous walnuts, but it is denatured alcohol. I just take a glass mason jar, I fill it about halfway, and then I'll take the shells. Now notice, this was pretty full. I like to load my mold cavities deeper than what I need them, and then I trim off the top. That keeps everything random. If I keep them shallow and then turn that down, I don't want to run out of walnut, right? I always want that character coming in. I don't want to have a side or an edge where there's nothing but resin. So I always make sure that I fill my molds a little deeper than what I need. I get the jar about half full, and I just shake it. And this is cleaning all that debris off the walnuts. It's getting any oils out of the shells that may have been there from the meat of the nut. Depending on how dirty the shells are, sometimes I'll shake it longer than others. Next, what I've got is a strainer and an old ice cream bucket. I'll dump them in there. This way, I can raise the shells up out of the bottom. All the alcohol falls inside, and I can pour that back in my jar for the next batch. So what I'm going to do now is move this around because those shells will hold alcohol, and they'll just dry quicker if they're not full of alcohol when you dump them out. And then I've got cardboard down. So you want to dump this on cardboard. You don't want to dump it on plastic. You want something to absorb that alcohol so that these nuts will dry. And I just spread them around, and I let them sit there for a day. And that way, overnight, all that excess alcohol will evaporate, the shells will be good and dry, and then tomorrow we can move along with the casting process. Meanwhile, I'm going to keep cleaning the rest of these up, so we've got a full mold tomorrow. All right, so it's day 2. I've allowed these to dry on the cardboard overnight, and that allowed the alcohol to evaporate. And as they dried, you're going to see a lot of small little debris and whatnot left on the cardboard, which is a good thing, because that's not going to be in our resin. So now what I'm going to do is place all these on a cookie sheet. I'm going to preheat the oven to about 220 degrees. That will allow any moisture or humidity that may be settled on these to evaporate. Plus, it's going to warm these shells. Resin likes warmth, so when you mix your resin up and pour over these, if they were cold, your resin may pull away from it a little bit and you won't get that bond you need. So by warming these up, we'll get a better adhesive bond between the resin and the shells. So I'm going to put these in the oven for about an hour. That should be just enough to warm them up, and then we'll come back to the casting room. Alright, so the walnuts are in the oven. They've got about 10 more minutes to go. And I've weighed out my resin. I'm using Alumilite Clear. So, because it's cold, you'll notice it's a little thick. I've got it measured by grams, equal weights of A and B. And now what I like to do is, because the B side gets a little thick when it's cold out, I like to warm it up just a little bit to thin it out. What that does, it'll raise the temperature just enough for the resin to be thin without really kick-starting my curing process. It'll still give me plenty of time to get my colors mixed in and poured in the mold and in the mold in the tank before I have to worry about anything setting up on me. But it will cut down on how long it takes me to mix it. So how I do that is, I take my shop clamp light. If you see my videos, you know what I'm doing here. I've got a 125 watt light bulb from the Farm Mart, and it generates heat. So I place that down and I put my cup of resin, B side only, in front of it, about 3 inches, and then I cover it with a foil pan. So now while this warms up, I'll let it sit for about 10 minutes. It'll bring my resin up somewhere between 80 and 90 degrees. That will be just enough to thin side B, so when I add A and B together, I'll spend less time mixing and more time getting my color in and pouring it. Alright, so I took the walnuts out, but prior to that, about 10 minutes ago, I put the molds in on top in the oven. I got them nice and warm. That way the cavities are nice and warm. There's no coldness. If your molds are too cold when you pour your resin, your corners, everything will kind of roll in from the sides. So I like to warm them up too. It just kind of helps give me a fuller block when I take the cast out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the walnuts and just fill each mold. And in the process, they come out of the oven, they're kind of hot, so this way the heat dissipates and your resin, your shells are warm but they're not hot, because you don't want to pour resin over something hot. It'll kickstart your curing process and things could go bad because it might solidify before you get them in all those small little void areas. So there's not much to worry about though. They cool off fairly quick. So again, they're still warm to the touch, but they're not hot. So these won't float on you, so there's no need to put anything over it. If they float, I might put a mesh over them and put rubber bands on it to hold everything down like I would in pine cones. But walnuts are heavy enough, they're not going to float up. So the bowl mold's ready. I'll continue filling the other one, and we'll take this in the casting room and mix our resin. Alright, so our resin, 103 degrees on the B side. It's real nice and thin, unlike what it was when we first poured it. This stuff, it's kind of like milk, consistency of milk. That'll be good for mixing. It'll mix up much quicker than if we were trying to get it all done with it being thick. So, what I usually do, I've got my mixing container out, I've got my drill ready, battery's charged up. I'm using the spade bit that I snapped the tip and rounded the edges off on the belt sander so there's no sharp edges. And that'll do my mixing for me rather than waste all my working time stirring on this. So I'm using carbon fiber black for my mica. I don't like to use dye when I pour over something like shells. There's a real smooth area in here, and I'm afraid the dye creates a little bit of slickness, I guess would be the word. I want to make sure that there's nothing oily, anything that's going to stop it from adhering to the smooth parts of these shells. So I'm going to stick with just straight powder. I'm going to pour the B side in first because it's thinner. I always start with the thin side. I feel like it mixes much easier than to get away from the walls than if I were to pour the thick in. If the thick were in there first, I would work harder to get it away from the edges. They're probably both about equal consistency by the time I warm B up, but I always pour the thinnest, what I think is the thinnest at the time in there. Now we're going to come in here and mix this. And again, we're using Alumilite Clear. It's got a 7-minute working time. If I felt like I was starting out and I needed more working time, I might start with Clear Slow. That would give you a 12-minute. But I'm pretty familiar with this resin, so it doesn't take a lot of time. And as you can see, it's already mixed. By warming B up, I didn't waste a lot of time trying to get this mixed. Well under a minute. I'm going to put my mica in. Also, there's no set recipe when it comes to how much mica to add. But yeah, there's not much left. So we're just going to put the rest in that I have. That comes with just practice where you like your consistencies, and I'll show you how I measure this in a second. So we'll mix this all up. The nice thing about walnuts, you can really use any color, a variety of colors if you want. I'm going to do this first one in black because when the shells dry out in the fall time and the squirrels start to eat them, everything is a real dark brown or black anyhow. So I think it'll accent those shell pieces. They'll stand out really well. All right. Our mica's mixed. How I would test this, I'll take a stick and I'll place it against the edge of the bowl. And then I will slowly move the stick away from the bowl. And if it disappears immediately, I know I have enough mica. If I can see it once I'm, say, a 1/16 or an eighth of an inch in, then I know I want to add more. But because I place it against the side of the container and slowly move it, it immediately disappears. I've got enough mica. Again, it's just your preference. Sometimes you might want a little transparency in there. So for this one, our resin's at 91 degrees. Now the reason it's below 100, I warmed B up to 100, but A was still cold, room temperature cold. I think it was around 60. So by the time I put the two together, mix them up, it didn't generate enough heat that I'm worried about it. It's still thin enough that I can pour it. And now, because we're not worried about color separation, I want to make sure I pour it at its thinnest state. I'm just going to put it in here so that it can get around all these pieces and in all the voids that it needs to be. If you were doing multiple colors, you might want to wait for the resin to reach maybe 90 degrees, 90, 95 degrees to give you some color separation. But you still have to be concerned about voids and getting it in there. Now, I always mix a little more than I need. This mold holds, I think, about 280, 290 grams of A and B combined. But I pour more because when I put this under pressure in the pressure pot, that volume is going to go down because the air is going to compress, and anywhere that there's air in this mold is going to be replaced with resin. So my volume is going to drop a little bit. But I can either use these for larger pieces or I can cut a little bit off the top when I decide to cut these in the blanks. So I like to make my blanks a little larger than what I need. Now we'll put this in a pressure pot and pressure it up to about 50 pounds. I always put the lid on at 2 screws at the same time, opposite of each other. That way I'm not putting any pressure on those metal threads if it gets torqued or canted. Hand tighten. Now I'm going to close that valve because I don't want my resin to be blown out of the bowl if I leave it open when I connect the air hose. Now that it's on there, I'm going to slowly open this pressure valve up to maybe about 1/3 or half until we get about 50 pounds of air in there. Now that we've got it pressurized, I'm going to let it sit for about 1.5 hours to fully cure. Okay, so we've got the mold in the tank, and as you've seen, I inflated it to 50 pounds. This is a 60-pound maximum air pressure pot, so I always stay about 10 pounds below maximum pressure. I close the valve and I disconnect the air hose. I don't let my compressor regulate the pounds in my tank. I don't want to risk overinflating, so I close the air valve, disconnect the hose, and I'll set it aside now to cure and move on to something else. It's been an hour and a half, which is more than enough time for Alumilite Clear. If it were clear slow, it gives you longer working time, but it also has to cure longer, so you'd want to wait about 3 to 4 hours for that. Alright, so here's our blanks, our mold. So we get a nice block. Now I'll take that to the bandsaw and we'll cut our pen blanks out of it. We'll get 5 out of this block. Alright, here's the blanks after we cut them all up. And again, these are cut 7/8 square for pen blanks. If you're into knife handles or whatever else you're going to be making, this is, you know, just something that I did for my needs right now, but you could pretty much cut these into whatever you want. And no matter what your mold size would be, the process is going to be the same. So these are ready to be turned down. As you can see, we've got walnut pieces throughout them. And because I extend them over the top of the mold and then cut the top off, we get that character on all the sides, except for the bottom, of course. But you would drill these after a day. I always let my resin blanks set for at least 24 hours before I do any turning on them. I let that resin reach its full curing capacity, and then you would cut these to your tube size, epoxy your brass tubes in, and turn them on the lathe like you do any other pen. Here's a finished pen that I made. I hope you liked the video and it gives you some ideas out there. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, let me know I'm doing something right. And if you want to see more, please subscribe and stop back for more here at Underhill Creations and Casting Solutions. I'm John, thanks for joining me.